we'll give it one more here. Hi, Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We have Leslie Pendleton with us, and we're going to give it a few more minutes for a couple more people to show up, we hope. But she's the development consultant that we'll be talking, some of us will be talking with later today, and that the rest of us will be hearing from, presumably over the next few months. So, and we're recording the session.
So think of some questions for me too, that you think other people might have, or that you have, certainly. Right. But
yep, about the possibilities of development campaign and where we might be going.
Yep.
Leslie, how do you determine the goal?
When we get to feasibility study. So that is, why don't I just start?
Just get started. Yeah.
See if people pop
It'll
in.
be recorded. People can catch up if they if it's desirable to, and I think we don't want to waste too much more time.
Yeah.
I'll watch and let people in as they show up.
Okay. Yeah, so I started speaking with Amy back in January. I used to be in the Diocese of Connecticut, so that's where I know Amy from. And I was a consultant with the Episcopal Church Foundation and staff person for capital campaigns for 11 years. And then ECF decided they weren't going to do capital campaign consulting any longer in January. And I got together with two other colleagues of mine and had an exciting launch of our collaboration core capital campaigns around the third week of March. So timing has not proven to be our best suit so far, but we've been continuing with some other campaigns that got started and were put on hold, and we're kind of back into the thick of things. But I was speaking to Amy on and off about doing this, and was thrilled that your vestry decided to move forward with this first phase. So we do, building up to a capital campaign is, in order to achieve success, you need to prepare a foundation and really spend some time letting people catch up. So you've got certain committees and vestries and leadership and all that that have been talking about this for a while, but not everybody in the congregation has been in deep conversation about these things. So the first phase, there's actually 3 separate contracts, 3 separate steps in a capital campaign. The first is discernment, and that is where we are now. The second is a feasibility study, and the third is the actual campaign or solicitation asking for pledges. We are far, far away from asking for any pledges. The discernment phase is a time of listening and communicating. So what we're doing, and we're asking people to sign up, is we're going to have a series of virtual meetings. This is new for me. They're normally cottage meetings in people's homes and gathering, face to face in groups of 10 or so. But we're going to be doing it through Zoom over the next month or so. I'm going to be training volunteer facilitators this afternoon to lead the meeting. And the goal of the meetings is really to hear what people are thinking about their church, about the future of St. Stephen's, what they love about their church, and for everybody else to take some time and listen to, I know there's a forum about the organ, sort of get questions answered about the state of the organ, what the place of organ music at a cathedral, but really this is a time to engage in the why your cathedral and why your church is important to you. We will have common agendas for the meeting, so each conversation, each group meeting is going to be similar with the similar questions. But we're going to take notes at all of those meetings, and at the end we will look through the notes and see where commonalities are, really identifying some core values and where the strengths and where the energy is, honestly, from the conversations. And we'll report that back to the congregation when we have all that data. Then your leadership will go back to the drawing board and say, okay, you know, there seems to be support for this, and there seem to be other things that people are interested. Maybe we have a group look at that. When there are projects identified and costs that go with them, we will move to a feasibility study. And the feasibility study is going to be a survey. We will write a tentative case statement, which is basically a description of the projects, what the costs are, and why it's important to St. Stephen's. And everybody in the congregation will be asked to either have an interview with me personally or to fill out that same survey form, the questionnaire. I will come back to you with a report, a full comprehensive report of that feasibility study. And in there, I will have a recommended goal and a specific dollar amount, which ascertains what we think that you can raise. We're still using the same feasibility study coordinator that worked with ECF, so there's decades of experience behind this. And 92% of previous clients reached or exceeded that goal. So it's a very accurate goal. The survey is right on. And then that gives you, before you get into asking people for pledges, it gives you an idea of how much you can raise. And if you need to adjust the goal or you need to adjust the projects before we actually get into the campaign, that's what happens at that point. The third phase is asking for pledges, and I won't go into that much now because you'll be hearing about it all along, but it's very similar. We have an advanced gift phase. I'll train volunteers. It's a 4 to 6 month process, and usually it's payable over a 3-year period. So people thinking, wow, this is a really weird time for a capital campaign. It really isn't. This is really the time where you're trying to engage people in conversation and thinking about the future. And when you'll be asking for pledges, hopefully we will be through the worst of this weird life we're all living right now. So I'd love to hear if anybody has any questions. That was a very quick review of the 3 phases. Usually the entire process takes about a year or a little more. So if you can start adjusting your mind to that.
Make a comment about one of our previous capital campaigns. We launched a capital campaign to primarily rebuild our school building, but also do some organ repairs and a number of other small aspects. And it was I think the goal was around $2 million. And we launched it on September 10th, 2001. We did not get our goal. We ended up with a $1 million mortgage on the school, which has only recently been retired. But I just think you should be aware that there are people who have 20-year memories of this who are going to be aware. Here's Bob Coleman. I'll let him in. Greetings, Bob. We are recording this session, so be aware. Anyhow, just a comment that capital campaigns know what they're doing and are wonderful and professional and so forth, but every once in a while something happens that we don't understand or don't anticipate. So I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but I just want you to be aware that that's in our history.
Yeah. Well, your capital campaign launch sounds a lot like my my new career launch. So,
right. Yes.
What's interesting about this time is people always say, is this the time for a campaign? And last year everybody was saying, I don't know, with the election. Well, the election, nobody seems to care about anymore. It's, you know, we're in the midst of this crazy crisis, and how long do we sit? We've been sitting 8 months now. So people are starting to even pick up and do this work still in the midst of it. I have a client who's in their third phase. I've been working with them for about 3 years, and they're launching their dual campaign right now. We just launched last week, meaning they're asking for their annual and capital pledges together. So, you know, I can't say that I have the workbook and the proof of how to do this in the midst of a pandemic. That one hasn't been written yet. But I do feel that there's, in a way, almost a deeper engagement with church and wanting to be back in your building and wanting to be back in community. And that's what we're always focusing on at this point and talking about. What does it mean to be St. Stephen's? What does it mean to you to be worshiping with the people you're missing right now in a beautiful historic building? So I'm hoping really that these virtual meetings might even be a little bit, no matter what, usually parishioners will come up to me and say, you know, that was great. Why can't we do more of this? You know, just having 90 minutes to talk about what you love about your church and dreaming a little, I think might be a really apropos time right now for people to be gathering, maybe meet somebody you don't know that well and share some thoughts about your church.
And I think the fact that most of us are missing the physical church. I mean, some of the folks on this call do go into the church for the Saturday evening services, but I don't. And yeah, Betty is, so we have both extremes. And it kind of brings home thinking about what is it that you miss? You know, what are the most important components of things you're missing, and how urgent is it to get back to those? So.
Yeah, I mean, often one of my questions is, if your church disappeared tomorrow, what would you miss? Well, we don't have to, you know, go that far in our imaginations. People have a hard time figuring that one out. Now it's like, I know exactly what I miss. So hopefully, you know, you'll have rich conversations. Some of the questions, the guiding questions, so that you can be thinking about them, is, you know, a standard, what do we do well? And which St. Stephen's ministry brings you the most joy and energy? How is St. Stephen's identified in the community? How are you known? What does stewardship mean to you? This is also your annual stewardship season, so we want people to be thinking about that as well. Does stewardship mean giving back to God? Does it mean dutiful support to keep your church running? Is it what your parents taught you to do? All of us come from different traditions as far as what our family's approach to money was, what our family's approach to philanthropy, and then how we've grown into that as adults. So that's sometimes an interesting thing to think about. And then the only other one is, if we had an endless supply of money, what could we do at St. Stephen's to the space to better serve our ministries? Would it be more welcoming, more comfortable, accessible, safe? Thinking about some of those things. And we're looking for people to, you know, not answer those questions, but really hopefully have a fruitful conversation with others and hear other points of view.
Let me just catch Bob up briefly. Bob, I'm sure you've figured out by now that we have Leslie Pendleton with us, who is the development consultant that we'll be working with for the next while. And this is a kind of an introductory conversation. So if you have questions, for all the rest of us too, she's hoping to hear things from us that will guide her in her understanding of our community and the next things we're doing. There's training this afternoon for those of us who will be leading a series of virtual cottage meetings. But, that's why we're catching up to this today. We have a smaller than usual crowd, so you guys all have to come up and think of questions for her, and let her understand our community better.
Thank you for reading me in. I was out on a bicycle ride.
Yep. Understood.
Leslie, what are what do we know now what we'll be raising money for other than the organ?
No, I mean, I think there's some ideas. There's a document that was circulated, two documents, one about, questions about the organ and another having to do with minutes of the task force looking at the organ. And part of the doing these virtual meetings is identifying what else we might be missing. Is there a need? Is there something else we should be looking at the same time, and maybe research that project? I know, from what I understand, there is some reconfiguration of the worship space that's going to have take place to accommodate an organ if that is the decision moving forward. So it is, the organ is sort of the obvious elephant in the sanctuary. But this initial discernment piece is to really identify other things. Sometimes you identify things that don't need any capital funding at all. And there seems to be energy and enthusiasm around that. So let's do that. And sometimes another need with capital funding occurs. And so we'll look into that before feasibility study. So you want to do these things before you're actually testing out the projects. I like to go to a feasibility study with more projects or more identified needs than you most likely will be able to take care of in a single campaign. Part of listening to the entire congregation and identifying these things is, okay, we heard you. Let's look into this project and we'll put it in the feasibility study. And maybe it has a lot of support from the entire congregation, or maybe it has very little support, but at least it's in there for people to consider. So that, we're hoping that some people will bring up some other items and other things they'd like to see happen there.
My husband, who's sitting off screen, just asked us, are there people needs? I know in the intermediate campaign after the school one of the identified things was funding for a second clergy person, which we've sort of done. And then she graduated and went off and is now on her own and an assistant in another church. But that's another valid aspect of financial, rather than maybe it's not capital to use for salaries, but maybe it is. That's a topic to be considered.
I strongly support that. I'm in general in favor more of behavior than bricks, although I support a campaign for the organ, but I would love to see enough of an endowment that it produces enough interest to support ad infinitum more clergy.
So I've done campaigns for staff and endowments and maintenance funds, things like that as well. It's hard to raise enough money to spin off money forever to support somebody. But there are efforts where if we raise this much, it will cover the first 2 years of somebody in this position. And hopefully that would, the congregation would be able to take that over in their annual budget, some plan around that. Extra money for maintenance funds. So you have this building or you have the organ. If you wanted to raise money that to add to your endowment or to add to a maintenance fund to keep that going, that's done as well. So certainly it does not have to be completely bricks and mortar. It's hard to do a campaign for a position because you're talking about a lot of money to be able to pay for that. But
something that might work, I don't know, just came into my mind. We have put probably as much energy as most parishes do into looking for endowment, end-of-life planning and wills and trusts and so forth. And we have there's a group of people who've made commitments to that. This may be a way, if a capital campaign identified endowment funds as a part of the target, that it publicizes that the value of that, and that may be something. I think our vestry has made the policy decision that any bequests go into the endowment fund,
Right.
so that might be a way to publicize, encourage that. I don't know.
So I'm glad you said that. It's almost like I paid you to say that. But part of the work that I do with any capital campaign client is the plan giving component. So in the feasibility study, we ask if people have remembered the church in their will, and sometimes that's the way we identify people maybe we didn't know about. You already have something set up. It would be really to enhance that and to look at dusting it off maybe and bringing it to the forefront and letting people know that this is an option. You know, this is the way all these buildings were built way back before you had so many people asking you for bequests. It's a parallel track. It's not like we would count it as in the capital campaign or anything, but it is a time to talk about it. We talk about annual, capital, and planned giving, all three areas of giving. And some people will say, you know, I'm not in a position to give to the campaign right now, but I have left the church in my will, or I want to leave the church in my will, and then we can continue the conversation with them. So it's an excellent point. And honestly, I would rather fund, you know, the gold standard of funding your endowment is through bequests, not through a capital campaign. So you do these capital campaigns every 10 years or so, but you have a strict policy that bequests go into your endowment. And then that policy is what ensures people that their life gift, that this gift that they've risen, the church is part of their family, so they are leaving this as they would a family member, that gift is respected by going into the church funds that will keep it going in perpetuity and not painting the nursery or doing whatever whim the vestry at the moment wants. So I'm glad you have that policy in place.
Yeah, Chip Abrams and I are the plan giving stewards or the shepherds for the plan giving. And we have a program every year. COVID, we didn't have one. Now our endowment spins off around $40,000 a year, which is used for maintenance. Great.
That's the way it's supposed to be. That's good. Yeah. And so I'll be working with you later on in the process, Betty.
And if you if your planned giving generates 25,000 or more, you can have a specific area where it goes.
Great.
Last capital campaign we had, if I remember correctly, we had tiers of asks, things that we needed, and they were prioritized by first tier, second tier, third tier. Now, I don't know what you think of that angle of setting up a campaign, or whether it's not such a good idea.
Well, in the case of needing, if you have a capital, let's say you have a complete capital plan that exceeds anything that you could do in a single campaign. Some have a master plan. So, you know, these 5 years will be spent doing this, and then beyond that, and you keep chipping away at that master plan. That's when the tiers come into play. As far as a single campaign, your feasibility study will reveal priorities. Now, they're priorities of the congregation. It's not a voting instrument. This does not replace the fiduciary and building responsibilities of the leadership. But it does give the leadership an indication of where people's passions are and what they think is important. The other purpose of the feasibility study is to right-size the campaign before you get to asking people for pledges. So you get this dollar amount, if that does not cover the cost of the projects identified, the decision there is, are we going to finance any of this, or are we going to cut these projects back to fit the cost, the money that we can raise? The idea is, I always want a church to go into the third phase, the V Capital campaign, with a clear understanding, a clear definition of what the projects are, how much they're going to cost. And if we raise this amount of money, we will do these projects. No more, no less. Don't overspend on one and let the other one go. Because this is the covenant you're making with the donors. If we raise this money, we're going to do these things. So I don't really have tiers or phases within that capital campaign, unless this is phase one and we're going to raise this amount of money and we know phase two is down the line, that sort of thing.
Do you prioritize then the needs when you get to the campaign?
They'll be prioritized through the feasibility study process.
As I recall, the tiers didn't work out well. I think some of them jumped from one tier to the other without, I think it got a little,
well,
yeah.
Some of that was changing conditions. I mean, some of those were things like, winterizing storm windows and so forth in the chapter house and the Bigler house and so forth. And those needs became more urgent and things. I wasn't involved in all the details, but I had a sense that those were somewhat moving targets. But we did make the prediction that we weren't going to go ahead and sign contracts and things until we had the money in place. But yeah, some of the priorities shift around.
Well, and if you hit something like 9/11 or 2000, you launched a campaign in 2008. The campaign I'm doing in Massachusetts right now, we came back with a recommended goal of 1.6 million. And they're going ahead with a campaign of 1 million because they realize there's been some economic impact. They really stripped down their needs to roof, HVAC, paint, to get, real physical needs, and we'll look at the moving the kitchen and an addition to the entryway in a future time. It just didn't seem like the right time. Normally, that's what you wanted to, define through a feasibility study, but then life happens, and you can't avoid that. So I think with your last campaign, if it hadn't been extenuating circumstances, you might have done everything that you wanted to if you'd been able to raise the amount of money. But
two campaigns. The 9/11 one was the first, and we've had an intermediate one, which was the one that was tiered.
Okay. Yeah, I am a stickler with making sure the costs are real, the overruns are put into that dollar amount, that money that you're saying, if you raise, you can do this project, that's real. It's not give or take a couple $100,000. It's not, oh, wow, we didn't realize, well, $500,000 was going to be for the organ console or the screen or whatever. It's those numbers have to be inflated, if anything, to cover it, because you don't want, even with no shenanigans or no wrong, no misguidance, if you can't do what you thought you could do for that money, it's a failed campaign. And that can live in your church's DNA for decades, whether there was mishandling or not. So the more accurate, the more transparent, and just specific when you're getting to that ask. And I push for the numbers and feasibility study too. They're always changing, and there's always things you can't account for, but you can predict them coming. So you put in some contingencies into that number and so forth.
Yeah, we can't get into another $1 million mortgage. That's just nothing that we deal with. Yeah. No,
you can't. Not these days.
Yeah, I think there are enough people in the church who've lived through that one that I think we're pretty safe from doing that again. That's why the intermediate campaign was so clear that no, we're not going to actually start work on any of these subphases until the money's in hand.
Right.
Right.
But that said, we got a pretty good school out of it, and whether it was worth the pain or not is not for me to say, but I think probably a bunch of graduates from the school would think it probably was. So.
If you've paid it off, then congratulations, then you got it. But the 90s, I think, 90s, or well, really the end of the 90s, I think, was the end of these Taj Mahal blueprints ready to go for the future of the church. And I think the church in general has become more realistic about their space and keeping that well maintained and all. Who knows? We're in, a lot of technology is going to be incorporated, I can imagine, into capital campaigns now. Our church in Exeter, we had a donor that gave us most of the money for it, for the recording and cameras for live streaming services. So I could see that as something that's going to come up with churches. Accessibility is always a major item to look at, because we're built on so many levels and wacky additions to churches.
Well, it'll be interesting. For sure.
And this part should be fun, the really engaging with people. And right now, what we want to do is encourage people to sign up for one of these meetings, because it's a good fellowship thing to do right now. You have your coffee hour, but if we can get people to really sign up and have 8 or 10 people on a call to talk about dreams and wishes and what ifs is a fun thing to be able to do right now. All right, well, would you all like to be relieved to have like a check-in coffee hour now instead of this? The process.
I think we've probably covered as much as we're going to with this crowd. I appreciate the folks who've, everybody's input. That's been good. But
thank you. Yeah.
Some of us will see you at 1.
Very good.
You're welcome to stay and socialize, but if you don't need to, that's fine. And
I'm going to go get a couple of things prepared, but good talking to you, and thanks for the invite.
Great. I'll stop the recording. And
nice to see you, Leslie.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. I'm going to end the recording.